Joining us now, Joe diGenova, legal analyst and former U.S. attorney to the District of Columbia. Joe, good morning.
Good morning.
Joe, your name was floating around this weekend, especially with Chris Wallace yesterday on Fox News Sunday. We're just going to play a little bit of what he had to say and get your reaction to it.
We have new information to report. Fox News has learned the president's private attorney, Rudy Giuliani, was not acting alone in trying to get dirt from Ukrainian officials on 2020 rival Joe Biden. Two high-profile Washington lawyers, Joe diGenova, who's been a fierce critic of the Democratic investigation, and his wife, Victoria Tensing, were working with Giuliani to get Oppo research on Biden.
All right, Joe, you and your lovely wife, Victoria Tensing, your name in the news there from Chris Wallace.
Well, first of all, also in that statement, he said that we were working as lawyers off the books. I have no idea what that means. I'll explain to you what we were doing, which was nothing. And he also said only the president knows the details of their work. This was the anonymous U.S. official he was quoting. That's absolutely false. So what is this all about? Rudy Giuliani received information that there were people in the Ukraine who could prove that there had been an effort to frame Donald Trump from people in Ukraine. So while looking into that allegation, he discovered that the vice president of the United States at the time, Joe Biden, had threatened to withhold $1.2 billion in loan guarantees unless the prosecutor there in Ukraine, who was investigating his son, Hunter Biden, was fired. The prosecutor refused. The president of Ukraine, Poroshenko, asked him to do it for the good of the country. He refused, and he was fired. When that happened, Rudy was told that there were a group of Ukrainian citizens and officials, whistleblowers, who wanted to provide information to the United States law enforcement authorities, but were prohibited from doing so by the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, who threatened them by saying, you cannot give this information. Trump is going to be impeached. And by the way, Biden is going to be president. So we were asked to represent the whistleblowers by Rudy because he was representing the president. We were not representing the president. And he wanted us to represent any whistleblowers because he would have a conflict of interest. He couldn't represent the whistleblower. We agreed to do that. However, the trip never occurred. It was canceled. We never went there. We never talked to anybody. We never did any work. And it's just nonsensical. And by the way, Fox knew this. They were told this. And by the way, any discussion that we may have had with Ukrainians is all privileged and confidential and will never be disclosed. We were not representing the President of the United States. Rudy Giuliani was. So that's what this is all about. This is absolutely ludicrous, and Fox should be ashamed of itself.
You know, Joe, I was a little confused when I heard it because it felt like deja vu because we had this conversation with you in principle back in May. The New York Times' Ken Vogel had written a report that referenced both you and your wife and was talking about the fact that you may be actually traveling to Ukraine as a part of this effort you're talking about to get to the bottom of what's going on with these whistleblowers and whether or not and how the Ukrainians have been involved in the election. So to me, it was kind of a surprise that Fox even invoked your name in this way in light of the fact that we already knew this story back in May.
Well, they did it for a very simple reason. This is payback. This is about my criticism of Judge Napolitano last week, which became a huge fight between Shepard Smith and Tucker Carlson. It then devolved into more criticism of everybody involved in this matter. And so what happened was Judge Napolitano and others got together and got this question planted with Chris Wallace on Sunday in order to stir up the hornet's nest. And it's clearly a false accusation. We never went to Ukraine. We weren't there. If we had gone, it would not have been to dig up dirt. It would have been to represent Ukrainians who wanted to come to the United States and speak with U.S. law enforcement officials. What an inane, and by the way, Fox knew that, and they didn't report a single word of that.
So where is the information that these officials in the Ukraine have been trying to get to the United States, to the Attorney General, because they were denied the visas, as we know? So where is that information? Has any of that information been transmitted to the U.S. finally, and is that what John Durham is investigating?
Well, I know that John Solomon has been working on this. He has interviewed a number of these people and has written stories about it. There are a number of officials over there who want to come here and to speak with U.S. law enforcement officials. That has not occurred yet. That's because the U.S. Embassy in Kiev is still not in the hands of the Trump administration. The U.S. Embassy in Kiev, in Ukraine, is run by George Soros' career diplomats. It is a monstrosity, and Trump has been harmed by it from the beginning.
Joe, I want to get into the big questions with you outside of the specifics there, but although we want to talk about those a lot. But this past week, all of a sudden now, we're talking impeachment in Washington, D.C. What do you see happening as Nancy Pelosi now has these 6 committees moving towards impeachment?
Well, I think they're going to impeach the president. I think they are going to relentlessly pursue and harass the president and witnesses and other people, pulling them up before these 6 various committees. And eventually, I think they're going to take a vote and impeach the president. Now, they're obviously not going to take that vote until they know positively they have the votes necessary to do that. But they're getting close to that number, and I think that's their goal. They want to impeach him and send it to the Senate.
One of the questions we had this morning was the president tweeted out last night that he wants the right to face his accuser. He has the right to face the whistleblower face to face. But impeachment is not a legal process. We were always told it's a political process. So is there a different set of rules by which the president now must operate in an impeachment process versus a legal process?
Well, if this person is going to testify before either the Intelligence Committee or the Judiciary Committee, then, of course, Republicans will have a chance to cross-examine that witness. The president will not have a lawyer present. He will be represented by the Republican members of the committee. We were told yesterday by Mr. Schiff that they had made arrangements for the witness to testify. The whistleblower, which he is not really, he is not a whistleblower. The whistleblower's attorney said this morning no such arrangement with Chairman Schiff has been reached as of this moment. So I don't know who's telling the truth. But the whistleblower, who clearly is a conniving plant, who was sent to the White House to gin this up. This was a completely created and crafted scenario. There is no doubt about it. And when you realize that the whistleblower rules were changed over the last few months to permit hearsay to be used as the basis for a whistleblower report, then you understand how deep this goes in the intelligence community. It's a really very frightening scenario where the intelligence community has decided they're going to take out a president. This is the Soviet Union.
Yeah, what's happening is very, very, very scary. We have a lot more questions for you, Joe. Don't go anywhere. More with Joe diGenova coming up. Welcome back. We are here with Joe diGenova, legal analyst, former U.S. attorney to the District of Columbia, and his name and his wife, Victoria Tenzing, their names in the news this weekend, claiming that they were working on this Ukraine probe along with Rudy Giuliani. But, Joe, you were just talking about how what's happening here, this is all made up. This person, this alleged quote-unquote whistleblower, leaker, or whatever you want to call this person, was put in the White House for a reason, to start this, to get this to happen. Is all of this happening now because Durham and Barr are getting too close to the source of what really happened with the phony Trump-Russia collusion story?
Well, I don't think that the timing of this so-called whistleblower disclosure is a coincidence. I don't believe in political coincidence. This was timed perfectly to try to change the subject from the upcoming Inspector General's report from the Department of Justice on the FISA abuse, and also on the final report by John Durham on the investigation into the origins of Crossfire Hurricane, that is Russiagate. So these two things are clearly related, and the purposeful disclosure of this was done. By the way, Nancy Pelosi knew about this ahead of time. She made a slip on Sunday during one of her interviews and said that she had seen this document before the president. And in fact, she had, because it was leaked to them before it was ever made public.
We talk about. I want to emphasize something that I think a lot of people haven't wrapped their head around. When you talk about the origins of the Russia investigation and election meddling, Ukraine is not often enough discussed. And one of the things that you mentioned in the last segment was with Rudy Giuliani, that this idea that Ukraine was involved in the seminal moments of this Russia meddling accusation against the president of the United States. How is Ukraine involved, and specifically, how does that relate to Paul Manafort?
There were people in the American embassy who were engaged in fomenting activity against Donald Trump. In the course of doing that, there were individuals, Ukrainians, who manufactured something called the Black Ledger, which contains false information about Manafort, which was transmitted by the Ukrainians to the United States and used by Mueller as part of his investigation. One of the things that is being looked into is who created this false Black Ledger. It is now known by the investigators who that person is, and that's one of the things that was going to be pursued by talking to Ukrainian whistleblowers, which never occurred.
Now, then you get a number of senators, Democratic senators, who recently, or at least in the last few years, were pressuring Ukraine to continue to investigate details that would be beneficial to the Mueller investigation. What happened there, and how does that relate?
There's a group of senators who wrote a letter, some of them quite unsavory characters, like Senator Menendez, Mr. being bribed, completely censured by the Senate Ethics Committee for his conduct with his dear doctor friend. A group of senators wrote a letter saying that if they didn't come up with certain information about President Trump and about activities in Ukraine by Manafort, they would not receive foreign aid. It is exactly what they allege Trump did, which, of course, Trump did not do any such thing. He didn't even mention the money. It never came up in the phone conversation between President Zelensky and President Trump. But the Democrats were so brazen in their effort to extort some sort of decision-making from a weak Ukrainian government that they put it in writing. It's hard to believe.
Joe, we don't have a lot of time left, but I just have a question about the timeline. The call happened on July 25th. The document that you fill out if you want for a whistleblower, I used to say firsthand information required. That was changed. The disclosure of urgent concern form was changed. Somewhere in August of 2019. That's the marking on the document state. It was revised in August of 2019, but they say it could have been somewhere between May of 2018 and August of 2019. So we don't have the specific date, but let's say it's that the marking is correct and it's August of 2019. The whistleblower complaint was dated August 12th, but the new form with the new changes were not uploaded onto the webpage until September 24th. So how could this whistleblower have filed the new paperwork on August 12th if it was not, the new form was not uploaded until September 24th?
Because I happen to believe that the Inspector General of the intelligence community was involved in this from the very beginning. I am very, very dubious of the Inspector General, Michael Atkinson. He worked for John Carlin, who was the Assistant Attorney General of the National Security Division during the periods of time when the FISA applications were fraudulently obtained against Carter Page. And this guy gets made the Inspector General of the intelligence community. I want the Inspector General investigated for his role in this. None of this makes any sense. It's all too packed, and there is just no doubt that somebody was working covertly inside the intelligence community and the Inspector General's office with this whistleblower. Let's find out who he is or who she is, and let's get them interviewed, and let's do a deep dive on their background, who they work for, how long have they been in the intelligence community, who sent them over there, what happened. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be found out about this so-called whistleblower. This whistleblower was a plant.
Yeah. Joe, this is so interesting, and we're so glad that you were here to be able to answer so many questions that we had. We appreciate you and Victoria so much. Thank you.
You bet.